We now have time for questions for our speakers, both from Intel and Allegion. Any questions? All you need to do is raise your hand, and there should be somebody scampering over to you to give you a microphone. Yes.
I had a question, Cindy. With the data and the analysis that you did, were there any aha out of that said we would have never suspected this supplier to have this big of risk?
So there were probably two ahas that we saw.
So maybe the reverse of that.
One was, I think Cindy described in the beginning that we had a supplier that came to us that was a longstanding supplier and asked to not be part of, their, not to have us as a customer anymore. They were looking to move in a different direction. So it was something that we did not see really moving forward at all. They were one of the ones that we piloted up there from a standpoint, and they came back as a low-risk supplier that was performing well, which we looked at that and we said, that's not really the right answer we wanted to see. But the talking point became very clearly that we can gather data, we can look at the right metrics, but there's still not any substitute for building a relationship with that supplier and really understanding what that supplier is doing and having a robust feel for how the relationship between us and that supplier is. And so we've certainly emphasized the fact that supply relationship management, which we as part of our strategy, is just as important and sometimes more than the data that you see from a performance standpoint.
And I might add just 2 points to that. Until we started this, I personally wasn't in my mind thinking about the risk topic to this degree. And now I'm categorizing suppliers as I'm talking with them. I'm knowing their data. I'm on a daily basis thinking that's a supplier that's a high risk. We need to keep them in front of us. The other piece is then also just being able to look at those categories. Yeah. So a big risk for us, we knew this, but it just hits you in the face. We're very heavily single sourced. We also don't have as much spend under contract. And one is what we should. And one thing we can do to reduce our risk is to get that spend under contract. So looking at those where we see where there's big chunks of red, those are things that from kind of an overarching strategy, that not specific to a supplier, but hey, we need to be really focused on getting 90% of our spend under contract. That's one thing we can do to mitigate risk. I think that's sort of another takeaway that we're getting from the data.
So Tom, on a different note, this is maybe this has been resolved, but there was a period of time when all of a sudden everybody was supposed to be worried about Intel chips and vulnerability. Is that gone?
No, the risk is not gone. What I would say is that they've mitigated a lot of it.
Okay.
There's been software patches that have put in and other things. I can't remember the percentage of the problem that's still out there, but there is still some risk in for some security side. One of the things that we found on this is that we just literally had a presentation by Google talking about the industry partnership that's now been driven because of this activity. There's always going to be some kinds of flaws. Most of the time we see them in advance, you end up with a software patch and you move things forward and there's no risk or no vulnerability. This time around we didn't see it. And so there's activities that they're now doing that I think you'll see with some of our biggest software partners where we spend more time collaborating across the industry to identify these things and find out ways of catching it earlier so that we can mitigate these types of risks.
And the other question was, as I was thinking about both of the presentation, it just seemed as if the direction you guys are going to go, you're going to be a bigger supplier to Allegion, right? So you would think that you're going down to Internet of Things, you guys are in the security and this business. This all is converging. So, historically, Intel, at least my characterization was high volume, high reliability, identical fabs across the world.
Yep.
The new reality is going to be very different.
Yeah, no, it's always been a hard supply chain because of the fact that the technology is so complicated. When you start getting into the wavelength of light is what's preventing you from making chips as fast as you want. It's hard, and you've got to get way ahead of it. The reality, though, is that it's going to be different hard now. So instead of only having factory challenges and technology challenges, now we're going to actually have, I think, challenges that other companies already have. More variable demand. A lot of people struggle with that. We've had a very large segment of the CPU business, so it's a little easier for us to call a market demand change. Now we're going to have a lot more trouble with that. Integration of solutions, and what do you do when something you bought isn't of high quality or isn't working in the whole mix? How do you validate the parts, and then actually as it goes through the supply chain, the supplier decides, hey, this is a substitute I can put in. How do you catch that in a highly technical space? I mean, if you're doing autonomous driving, the risk is not financial. It's people's lives, right? I mean, it's pretty substantial. And so those kinds of things other people have had to deal with. We have to deal with that and the technology challenges now and figure out how to put those two things together.
So for Allegion, what do you see the future? Just as they are looking at the future with the robots and the data and other things influencing the products that they're going to, do you see a similar
for our
challenge
space,
for your
and
space?
I was kind of commenting to Tim when Tom was talking, because thinking about 10 years, I'm lucky to get 3 years or 4 years down the road. But our business, there's a big electromechanical convergence. You think of lock and door hardware. It's traditionally very mechanical. But think of home automation. Think of just how technology is advancing. Huge migration globally, especially in China, but globally to the electronic space. So that's our business is definitely shifting, and not just on locks, and security systems, but even the more commercial, traditional hardware is electronic. Sensors, connected home, connected building. That's how it's going.
The other areas we get into that you don't even think about when we talk about electronic locks is how do you manage the efficiency of the power that's required to operate them, which is something we've never had to really think about before. So it starts to expand our channel, get us outside of our box by far.
So wireless charging is not happening tomorrow?
It's getting close.
Sorry, there was a question.
Yeah, back to the Allegion scorecards. Who in your organization is responsible for collecting the data and then doing the evaluations?
Yep. Our commodity managers are. So each of the suppliers they're categorized as a commodity. And we've got, about 15 commodity managers, probably more than that globally. But they're responsible for their scorecards. A lot of the information is available, I'll say automated. The D&B stuff comes in, they just pull it in.
So we have data owners. The data owners. There's data owners that are responsible for making sure the data is managed very well, so that it's not you don't have to go find it, but the category managers are responsible for making sure they can pull it and use it.
Yeah, and they should be knowing that. They should. You may say, "Oh, that may take a little bit of time," but that's their job to understand their commodity. This is not. This is basic information we should know.
Question over here. In regards to the scorecard and you having your commodity managers, the business doing the performance scorecards, what's your intervals for performance versus risk?
Go ahead.
So performance, we usually look at it on at least a monthly cadence. So it's because that's fairly dynamic, and that's throughout the year how well you're performing. It ties back to the business performance. The risk standpoint, probably annual. Maybe every 6 months at the most, because a lot of that information is, for the most part, not changing or not dynamic, where the operational metrics are dynamic. So they're not on the same cadence at all. The operational is definitely a monthly cadence, and the risk would be maybe annually.
And just one other thing to add. So there's the data and the scorecard, what Tim said, scorecard once or twice a year. But the real work is in mitigating the risk. And so the hard part for us is deciding the process to do that. We have a cross-functional council or group steering team, whatever we want to call them, that will be the recipients of that data. We will have a watch list, and we'll be meeting, monthly, on a monthly cadence to work through what is our risk mitigation plan. That'll go into our capital plan. So there'll be activity on an annual basis, or on a monthly basis, but the data, it doesn't change that much, so it'll change. We'll change it once or twice a year.
Any other question? So one of the things that both of you mentioned is the idea of things getting more connected. And the problem is, people think about, well, if I can monitor your pacemaker, I can do this with it. And the moment you hear the word connected, you start thinking about viruses and malware and everything else. And so I was talking to a faculty member who teaches design, and he says, you can make a chair connected or your table connected. And the downside is this poor table, which was by its lonesome self, at least never had any problems with malware attacking it. Right? Worst case, you've got to put a shim under it. Now, there is the thing that's interesting is that connectedness comes with all this risk. So is there a whole layer? I mean, because on the one hand, the moment you say there's a risk associated with connectedness, the answer is, and I think it came up earlier, the answer is you sort of, I think Maria mentioned that you shield the SAP system in your plant so that it's not connected to anything else. So I'm just wondering, this whole connected versus not connected and what it should be to get the functionality, what's going on there? What do we expect to see? Will the pendulum swing where everything will get connected? And then all of a sudden, if everybody has a Nest thermostat in their home controlling their thing, then some malware can attack that thermostat and switch off all your heating in the middle of the night on a very cold day. Things get bad. So where is that pendulum switching? Are people understanding that new protocols will come and will shield it? Or is this something whereby there will have to be sort of a hardware portion to this fix that's different from the software portion of protection?
So I'll take that, I guess. So I think realistically, there's value in the connectedness, and people will move towards that value. Now, there's risks associated with it. There's no question about that. And I think our security processes for software will have to get a lot more advanced than they are today. I just was talking to a very large consulting firm, and they've moved all of their IP to a public cloud. It's not a private cloud, it's a public cloud. And they came to the conclusion that was safer than actually trying to do it on premises. And I'm not going to say who that is, but at the end of the day, I think there's a real push right now to say, what's the reality versus the fear?
Okay.
And I think we're going to see some large companies move. And I think you're already seeing with Nests and other things, people are already moving in that direction. The thing that's most shocking to me is my credit was taken in that whole last deal here not too long ago. And a lot of people were impacted by that whole thing, and yet I don't see too much change in the way people are operating. And so I think people are accepting a lot of this stuff, and they're trying to figure out how they protect themselves. So I think it's a wave that will continue to go, and there'll be a bunch of potholes as we move forward.
And I don't want to claim to be, I don't really want to even speak on behalf of Allegiant on that topic, but I would just make a couple comments. I would say we, for years, have had product that you would consider connected. I would say for 5 years, we've had a solution where on my phone I can open my door for my daughter or whoever. I can give them a code, whatever. That technology, that's something that we have took our time introducing and have metered our way into the market. I would say we are metering our way into the market. And if you go back to our earnings release, not the one that came out a couple days ago, but at the end of, the end of Q3, there was a comment to our CEO about, because I think the day before, I think Amazon had announced a partnership with a lock company that would allow delivery people to drop things in their homes. And the discussion was, are you, what are you guys doing? And are you on track? And I think our position is we're going to meter ourselves and make sure we're prepared and ready, as we advance in that. I know since then there's been some issues with that situation. So, I think your point is well taken, and we're gonna go at the pace that makes sense.
And both of you, I think, at different points, unless I misread it, mentioned that somehow the risk has been increasing, right? So one, if I step back, is it just because more of the tasks are being done by suppliers, so therefore you have slightly less control, that the risk has increased? Or did it just happen that the product complexity increased, So nailing everything down so that you can project what would happen. Where is the risk increase coming from?
And quite honestly, my statement is probably maybe one more of perception than one of data.
Okay.
There's not data. We didn't have a metric before.
Oh, I see,
I can
I see.
tell you though, in 2017, 2016, there were a number of things that were sort of unusual supply chain impacts. Some of the ones that I put up on that chart, those are things we hadn't had in prior years. So it just got to the point that it made our radar screen.
On our end, I think it's actually different, maybe not new, because again, a lot of these markets we have been in to where we were using a lot of outside vendors to do some of these things, and so I think our experience is limited in terms of what it takes and what the real risk is. I think what we are finding though is that there's a real cost-benefit trade-off, right? You're trying to get the best cost you can from your supplier, which drives behavior. And that behavior is at times to try to find ways to save some money. And those aren't always aligned with our risk profile. And I think trying to figure out how you do that better, and I think you guys are looking at a more systematic way of doing that. I think that's a important area we're gonna have to figure out how to go do over time.
We're starting to see also a couple things, complexities, certainly increasing the personalization aspect of what the consumer wants is creating a little more complexity. And the other aspect is time. There's certainly an element where for whatever reason, we don't want to wait as much as we used to. It's, we want it now, and someone's going to figure out how to deliver it now. And if we don't meet that competitive or respond competitively, it's a loss of revenue. And I think time adds to the pressure of risk as well.
So one of the things that's interesting is that, we here in the university used to have a little more time, but what I realized is this week at 5:45 p.m. yesterday, because I'm department head, I was told to make a job offer because the competing offer from this person would expire this morning.
Right.
Now, our business office is closed, so literally at some point, I just rolled the dice, in terms of the offer. And luckily, I had gotten this cleared, and so everybody had more or less cleared, but they didn't have time to clear this. And if I hadn't done this and this repeated 4 times this week. But one of them was 11 o'clock, I'm walking into class. They said, while you're in class, the person will be making a decision regarding whether to take the job offer. And in that case, we were competing with the Federal Reserve. Luckily, we got him to turn down the Federal Reserve and join us. But we had literally no time. This has never happened before. And what we've found now is everybody is spinning, and the clock is spinning faster and faster. Now, the price we pay is errors in contracts, because when you speed through these things, mistakes will happen. Luckily, we haven't made a big mistake yet. We didn't put an extra 0 somewhere. If we did, then I wouldn't be here. Luckily, somebody checks our zeros. So, but yeah, I think when you say these things, even for us dear old universities, we've been around 150 years, we hope to remain here a few years longer. We're dancing like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is I think that's a place where artificial intelligence is really going to help. I really think that's going to be a breakthrough for a lot of our challenges. We're trying to apply it in contracts. We're trying to apply it in all kinds of things, because what you do tends to be the same thing. And there tends to be some pretty basic rules to it, and not all of them are overly intuitive, or I should say obvious. And I think we're seeing that we think we can eliminate a lot of those errors by actually having artificial intelligence learning from what we do, and then helping to give you the Rev 0. And at some point you say the Rev 0 is just fine, I'm going to stop looking at it.
Yeah, okay. Excellent. Okay, so thank you again. Thank you to Tom, thank you to Cindy, thank you to Tim for a wonderful session.